Welcome back to Andersen Acres. It's a little gloomy outside, but it's not overly cold, so I thought we'd film out here. Today we're going to talk about something that's not that much fun to deal with, but it's so important to know about so you can recognize it. We're talking about Wryneck in domestic rabbits. That's what it looks like. Let me tell you, it's not always an easy fix. We've had to deal with it twice. Once, a couple of 3 decades ago, when knowledge of domestic rabbits was not what it is now. I'll tell you about those two stories in a little bit. Sometimes Wryneck is a long road, sometimes it's heartbreaking, and sometimes it does have a happy ending. It's not as straightforward in rabbits as it is in chicks, so it can be complicated. So let's dive in and talk about why it's complicated, why it happens, and what you might be able to do about it. Though I'll warn you, there's not always anything you can do. So what is Wryneck? Okay. Wryneck, sometimes they call it head tilt. It's exactly what it sounds like. The rabbit is doing that. Okay. That's exactly what they do. When a rabbit's head tilts severely to one side, you have a case of Wryneck. Some rabbits can still move around okay, and some end up rolling around and unable to find their balance and unable to stand up for more than a few seconds because they just keep falling over or rolling. It's not fun. It looks alarming because it is alarming, but it's a symptom, not a disease itself. So Wryneck tells you there is something wrong. It doesn't necessarily tell you what that something is. Okay? Wryneck is your rabbit's way of telling you something's just not right, and you do need to address it. So what causes it? Well, there's not just one cause is the problem. That's why it's really tricky to fix. There are two main causes, but then there's a host of smaller causes. So the most likely causes of Wryneck in your domestic rabbits are ear infections or parasites, specifically the E. Cuniculi parasite. That one is devastating. So first off, though, ear infections. These can get deep into the middle ear or inner ear where they mess up the rabbit's balance. Rabbits are really good at hiding pain, so you might not even know they've had an ear infection until they just can't balance, until their head is tilted or they're falling over. You might not notice because rabbits don't show you that they hurt, which is irritating, but it also is the way it is. So you're going to have to learn how your rabbits behave so that you can spot when there's something different. Okay? And falling over is not normal. So, the second cause is usually E. Cuniculi. It's a microscopic parasite that attacks the brain and the nervous system. A lot of rabbits carry it but never show symptoms. But if their immune system drops, or if the parasite gets into the brain, you can end up with Wryneck. Other causes can include trauma, like falling, tumors, like cancers, or even a stroke. But ear infections and E. Cuniculi are definitely the big two causes. So what does it look like? Well, like that. And it usually starts small. So when it starts small, you might notice a little bit of tilting of the head. Okay? They might have difficulty balancing, especially when they stand upright on their back legs. They might have a tendency to fall over. They might walk in circles and do it persistently, not, oh, I'm just looking at something. They might just constantly circle. They might roll onto their side and struggle getting up. That one's pretty common. So watch your rabbits, see if they struggle to stand upright. Their eyes also might be flicking back side to side, just not that fast. But if you notice, that is a sign that they might have Wryneck. That's one of the earlier signs. So watch for it. Once you notice, it can either stay mild or it can get a lot worse. And if it's going to get worse, it usually gets really, really bad, really, really fast. So it goes from bad to worse in a matter of days. So time is important because it's going to happen just that fast. So how is it diagnosed? This is where you get really frustrated because diagnosing Wryneck isn't always that straightforward. And I have ducks over that way. But diagnosing Wryneck is not as straightforward as you might hope it is. Your vet will look at the symptoms first. They might recommend blood work to check for E. Cuniculi. They might do x-rays to check for ear infections. That is pretty common. But sometimes even after testing, you still don't get a clear answer. Sometimes the infection doesn't show up clearly. Sometimes blood tests show past exposure to E. cuniculi, but not whether it's currently active and causing a problem right now, which is what you need to know. So a lot of the time, treatment is going to be based on educated guesses. This is where a rabbit-savvy vet really comes in handy. Okay? How do you treat it? Well, depends on what the vet thinks is causing it, really. Usually, there's a combination of treatments. So a lot of times, it'll be antibiotics if there's an ear infection present or if you suspect there's an infection. There will often be antiparasitic meds, especially if it's E. cuniculi. You might end up prescribed I always say it wrong, fenbendazole. I always have to take a minute. So you also might get anti-inflammatories if there's inflammation in like the ear canal causing problems. Are we all having a party? That's excellent. So you might have that, but the biggest portion of the treatment is going to be the supportive care that you and the vet are going to provide. Supportive care is huge. You are going to have to do things like hand feeding if it's necessary, because sometimes the rabbits can't eat because they're all twisted or they keep falling over, they can't stand up. You might have to hand feed your rabbit, and you might have to soak pellets in water and use a syringe. It's going to suck, but it can save their life. You also might try patting the rabbit's area, so when they are flopping or sometimes it can almost look like a seizure. It's not, but it almost looks like one. Sometimes you might want to pad the area so they don't get hurt. So if they do flop or thrash, they don't injure themselves, because that is just a complication you don't need. You might need to help your rabbits stay upright, especially when eating or drinking. And if it's a really bad case, you might have to help them stay clean if they tend to roll a lot where they shouldn't in their poop or something, or if they tend to soil themselves and can't keep themselves clean because they keep falling. So you might have to do all of those things, or only some of them. It depends how severe the case is. Some rabbits recover completely. Some live with a permanent tilt, but no other real issues. And sadly, some will never recover and never live a full life after it sets in. So, I mentioned earlier that we had dealt with this a couple of times. The second time I'll tell you about first, because I have had 2 rabbits with Wryneck. One was just a few years ago. His name was Pumpernickel. He had an ear infection for him. We caught it early, did aggressive antibiotics, and he made a full recovery after about 2 months of care. So he did just fine. But back in the late 90s, which I know is a long time ago now, I know I'm dating myself here. I'm not young, okay? But, okay, dating myself a little bit. But in the early 90s, we had another rabbit, and it was probably, in hindsight, E. cuniculi, but this was the 90s. We didn't know much about rabbits then. Her name was Sasha, the rabbit, and vets didn't really see rabbits, and we didn't really know anything about them. You've got to remember, back then, we were still keeping them in little cages and feeding them only pellets. What? Sorry, there's a rooster making a weird sound. So, anyway, Sasha, she lived with that tilt for several years. It took a lot of supportive care, and we didn't know what we were doing. Like, there were no rabbit savvy vets then. Vets just didn't see rabbits. So I was still in high school, and my mom helped me, and we did the best we could, and we gave her the best life we could possibly give her. And she did well for several years. She needed a lot of care for those years. Like, she had to have some support when she stood and stuff like that because she would tumble over. But she wasn't unhappy. She wasn't in a lot of pain. She was just odd. So my mom helped me look after her for several, 3-4 years, I think, after that happened. We had her. It was a long time ago, so I might be not remembering the number of years correctly, but it was a while. It's a real roller coaster when you have one that never really gets better. You have good days, bad days, days where there's setbacks, days where you think they're making progress. It varies. It can be exhausting, and if you need the help of a qualified vet, it can get expensive. But it can be so worth it if you love that rabbit and you just want to see him happy again. So it's worth it to treat it if you can. You can't always. And this is the hard part that sometimes we don't like talking about. Okay? Because sometimes they're not going to get better. Sometimes, despite all your best efforts, the rabbit can't stabilize. If they can't eat, they can't drink, can't stop rolling and tumbling, if they can't live a full life, if there's no improvement after a reasonable treatment window, euthanasia might be the kindest option. That's something you have to talk about with your vet. It's a personal decision, and it's never easy. Choosing to let them go is never something we take lightly, but if you're facing it, please know you're not alone. We've all had to make that decision for our buns or our cats or our dogs, or we've all had to do it at some point. And it sucks. It sucks. It just does. It's not your fault, though. Wryneck is not really, there's not a lot you can do to prevent it. We'll talk about some of the things you can do, but if it sets in, and you kind of just have to deal with it. So sometimes loving your bunny means fighting for them, and sometimes loving them means letting them go. Only you can know what the right choice is. You should discuss it with your vet and your family, but it is important to know when to stop, when quality of life is never coming back. Okay? That's important. However, there is some good news. Many rabbits do survive Wryneck. Both of mine survived it. One did better than the other, but they both survived it. Some adjust to a tilted world and live full, happy lives, maybe with a little supportive care on your end. Rabbits are incredibly resilient little creatures. Never underestimate their will to live or their ability to adapt to challenges. Now, what can you do to prevent it? There isn't a lot, but there are a couple of things. You can't always prevent it, but there are a few things you can do to help reduce the risk. You want to keep hutches and enclosures clean and dry. That is always going to be the first thing. You want to watch for signs of ear infections. Try to catch it really early. The earlier you catch it, the faster and better the treatment. You want to get regular vet checkups because they'll spot things you don't. Like, our farm vet checks our rabbits every time, every year. He makes sure that every time he's here, he glances at them, checks everyone, sees if there's anything weird going on that maybe I didn't spot. I'm more likely to spot it than he is because I'm around them every day. But having a vet give your rabbit a once-over, not a bad idea. You also want to quarantine new rabbits for 30 days. 30 feet for 30 days. That's the rule. 30 feet for 30 days. Keep them 30 feet away from your existing rabbits for 30 days to see if they come down with something. If they have E. Cuniculi especially, you do not want that bouncing over to the rabbits you already have. Quarantine. It will help prevent things like that from spreading, and then you don't end up with 6 rabbits with Wryneck. You only have the 1. It makes a difference. So quarantine. That's the rule. You also want to avoid stress on your rabbits for a lot of reasons. But if they are carrying something like E. Cuniculi, a lot of stress can trigger flare-ups. If they already have Wryneck and they don't exhibit too many symptoms and they're generally living a fine life, then stress can cause a flare-up and make it worse. So definitely try to avoid stress. Okay? Keep your rabbits calm. Keep them happy. Ducks. Ducks, man. But that is about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. Drop a comment below if you've ever experienced Wryneck with your rabbits, or if you have any questions about it. I'd love to hear your stories, and I will answer your questions if I can, or I will refer you to someone who can answer them if I can't. We'll see you tomorrow.